Chapter 7. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The willow wren was twittering his thin little song, hidden in the dark selvage of the river bank. Though it was past 10 o'clock at night, the sky still clung to and retained some lingering skirts of light from the departed day, and the sullen heats of the torrid afternoon broke up and rolled away at the dispersing touch of the cool fingers of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day that had been cloudless from dawn till late sunset, and waited for his friend to return. He had been on the river with some companions, leaving the water rat free to keep an engagement of long standing with Otter, and he had come back to find the house dark and deserted, and no sign of Rat, who was doubtless keeping it up late with his old comrade. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings, and how very good they had all been. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. "Oh, the blessed coolness," he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. "You stayed to supper. Oh, you stayed to supper, of course," said the mole presently.
"Simply had to," said the rat. "They wouldn't hear of my going before. You know how kind they always are, and they made things as jolly for me as ever they could, right up to the moment I left. But I felt a brute all the time, as it was clear to me they were very unhappy, though they tried to hide it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in trouble. Little Portly is missing again, and you know what a lot his father thinks of him, though he never says much about it."
"What, that child?" said the mole lightly. "Well, suppose he is. Why worry about it? He's always straying off and getting lost and turning up again. He's so adventurous. But no harm ever happens to him. Everybody hereabouts knows him and likes him, just as they do old Otter. And you may be sure some animal or other will come across him and bring him back again all right. Why, we found him ourselves miles from home, and quite self-possessed and cheerful."
"Yes, but this time it's more serious," said the rat gravely. "He's been missing for some days now, and the otters have hunted everywhere, high and low, without finding the slightest trace. And they've asked every animal, too, for miles around, and no one knows anything about him. Otter's evidently more anxious than he'll admit. I got out of him that young Portly hasn't learnt to swim very well yet, and I see he's thinking of the weir. There's a lot of water coming down still, considering the time of the year, and the place always had a fascination for the child. And then there are, well, traps and things, you know. Otter's not the fellow to be nervous about any son of his before it's time. And now he is nervous. When I left, he came out with me, said he wanted some air, and talked about stretching his legs, but I could see it wasn't that. So I drew him out and pumped him, and got it all from him at last. He was going to spend the night watching by the ford. You know the place where the old ford used to be, in bygone days, before they built the bridge?"
"I know it well," said the mole. "But why should Otter choose to watch there?"
"Well, it seems that it was there he gave Portly his first swimming lesson," continued the rat. "From that shallow, gravelly spit near the bank. And it was there he used to teach him fishing, and there young Portly caught his first fish, and of which he was so very proud. The child loved the spot, and Otter thinks that if he came wandering back from wherever he is, if he is anywhere by this time, poor little chap, he might make for the ford he was so fond of. Or if he came across it, he'd remember it well and stop there and play, perhaps. So Otter goes there every night and watches. On the chance, you know, just on the chance."
They were silent for a time, both thinking of the same thing. The lonely, heart-sore animal crouched by the ford, watching and waiting, the long night through, on the chance.
"Well, well," said the rat presently, "I suppose we ought to be thinking about turning in."
But he never offered to move. "Rat," said the mole, "I simply can't go and turn in and go to sleep and do nothing. Even though there doesn't seem to be anything to be done. We'll get the boat out and paddle upstream. The moon will be up in an hour or so, and then we will search as well as we can. Anyhow, it will be better than going to bed and doing nothing."
"Just what I was thinking myself," said the rat. "It's not the sort of night for bed anyhow, and daybreak is not so very far off, and then we may pick up some news of him from early risers as we go along."
They got the boat out, and the rat took the sculls, paddling with caution. Out in midstream there was a clear, narrow track that faintly reflected the sky. But wherever shadows fell on the water, oh, but wherever shadows fell on the water from bank, bush or tree, they were as solid to all appearance as the banks themselves, and the mole had to steer with judgment accordingly. Dark and deserted as it was, the night was full of small noises, song and chatter and rustling, telling of the busy little population who were up and about, plying their trades and vocations through the night till sunshine should fall on them at last and send them off to their well-earned repose. The water's own noises, too, were more apparent than by day, its gurglings and cloops more unexpected and near at hand, and constantly they started at what seemed a sudden clear call from an actual articulate voice. The line of the horizon was clear and hard against the sky, and in one particular quarter it showed black against a silvery climbing phosphorescence that grew and grew. At last, over the rim of the waiting earth, the moon lifted with slow majesty till it swung clear of the horizon and rode off, free of moorings, and once more they began to see surfaces, meadows widespread and quiet gardens, and the river itself from bank to bank, all softly disclosed, all washed clean of mystery and terror, all radiant again as by day, but with a difference that was tremendous. Their old haunts greeted them again in other raiment, as if they had slipped away and put on this pure new apparel and come quietly back, smiling as they shyly waited to see if they would be recognized again under it. Fastening their boat to a willow, the friends landed in this silent silver kingdom, and patiently explored the hedges, the hollow trees, the runnels and their little culverts, the ditches and dry waterways. Embarking again and crossing over, they worked their way up the stream in this manner, while the moon, serene and detached in a cloudless sky, did what she could, though so far off, to help them in their quest, till her hour came and she sank earthwards reluctantly, and left them and mystery once more held field and river. Then a change began slowly to declare itself. The horizon became clearer, field and tree came more into sight, and somehow with a different look. The mystery began to drop away from them. A bird piped suddenly and was still, and a light breeze sprang up and set the reeds and bulrushes rustling. Rat, who was in the stern of the boat while Mole sculled, sat up suddenly and listened with a passionate intentness. Mole, who with gentle strokes was just keeping the boat moving while he scanned the banks with care, looking at him with curiosity. "It's gone," sighed the rat, sinking back in his seat again. "So beautiful and strange and new. Since it was to end so soon, I almost wish I had never heard it, for it has roused a longing in me that is pain, and nothing seems worth while but just to hear that sound once more, and go on listening to it forever. No, there it is again," he cried, alert once more. Entranced, he was silent for a long space, spellbound. "Now it passes on, and I begin to lose it," he said presently. "Oh, Mole, the beauty of it! The merry bubble and joy, the thin, clear, happy call of the distant piping. Such music I never dreamed of. And the call in it is stronger even than the music is sweet. Row on, Mole, row, for the music and the call must be for us." The Mole, greatly wondering, obeyed. "I hear nothing myself," he said, "but the wind playing in the reeds and rushes and osiers." The rat never answered, if indeed he heard. Rapt, transported, trembling, he was possessed in all his senses by this new divine thing that caught up his helpless soul and swung and dandled it, a powerless but happy infant in a strong, sustaining grasp. In silence, Mole rowed steadily, and soon they came to a point where the river divided, a long backwater branching off to one side. With a slight movement of his head, Rat, who had long dropped the rudder lines, directed the rower to take the backwater. The creeping tide of light gained, and now they could see the color of the flowers that gemmed the water's edge. "Clearer and nearer still," cried the rat joyously. "Now you must surely hear it. Ah, at last I see you do." Breathless and transfixed, the Mole stopped rowing as the liquid run of that glad piping broke on him like a wave, caught him up, and possessed him utterly. He saw the tears on his comrade's cheeks and bowed his head and understood. For a space they hung there, brushed by the purple loosestrife that fringed the bank, then the clear, imperious summons that marched hand in hand with the intoxicating melody imposed its will on Mole, and mechanically he bent to his oars again, and the light grew steadily stronger, but no birds sang as they were wont to do at the approach of dawn. And but for the heavenly music, all was marvelously still. On either side of them, as they glided onwards, the rich meadow grass seemed that morning of a freshness and a greenness unsurpassable. Never had they noticed the roses so vivid, the willow herbs so riotous, the meadow sweet so odorous and pervading. Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air, and they felt a consciousness that they were nearing the end, whatever it might be, that surely awaited their expedition. The wide half circle of foam and glinting lights and shining shoulders of green water, the great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies and floating foam streaks, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing rumble. In midmost of the stream, embraced in the weir's shimmering arm spread, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with willow and silver birch and alder. Reserved, shy, but full of significance, it hid whatever it might hold behind a veil, keeping it till the hour should come, and with the hour those who were called and chosen. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, and in something of a solemn expectancy, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence they landed and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage and undergrowth that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn of a marvelous green, set round with nature's own orchard trees, crabapple, wild cherry, and sloe. This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me. Oops, whispered the rat as if in a trance. Here, in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we shall find him. Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror, indeed he felt wonderfully at peace and happy, but it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently, and still there was utter silence in the populous bird-haunted branches around them, and still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. He might not refuse, were death himself waiting to strike him instantly, once he had looked with mortal eye on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling he obeyed, and raised his humble head, and then in that utter clearness of the imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible color, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eyes of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns, gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern, hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long supple hand still holding the panpipes only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic ease on the sward, saw last of all, nestling between his very hoofs, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little round, podgy, childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw, for one moment breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky, and still as he looked, he lived, and still as he lived, he wondered. What? He found breath to whisper, shaking. Are you afraid? Afraid? Murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. Afraid? Of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh, Mole, I am afraid. Then the two animals, crouching to the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon facing them, and the first rays, shooting across the level water meadows, took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were about to look once more, the vision had vanished, and the air was full of the carol of birds that hailed the dawn. As they stared blankly in dumb misery, deepening as they slowly realized all they had seen and all they had lost, a capricious little breeze, dancing up from the surface of the water, tossed aspens, shook the dewy roses, and blew lightly and caressingly in their faces, and with its soft touch came instant oblivion. For this is the last best gift that the kindly demigod is careful to bestow on those to whom he has revealed himself in their helping, the gift of forgetfulness. Lest the awful remembrance should remain and grow and overshadow mirth and pleasure, and the great haunting memory should spoil all the afterlives of little animals, helped out of difficulties, in order that they should be happy and light-hearted as before. Mole rubbed his eyes and stared at Rat, who was looking about him in a puzzled sort of way. "Beg your pardon? What did you say, Rat?" he asked.
"I think I was only remarking," said Rat slowly, "that this was the right sort of place, and that here, if anywhere, we should find him. And look! Why, there he is, the little fellow!" And with a cry of delight, he ran towards the slumbering Portly. But Mole stood still a moment, held in thought, as one wakened suddenly from a beautiful dream, who struggles to recall it, and can recapture nothing but a dim sense of the beauty of it. The beauty! Till that, too, fades away in its turn, and the dreamer bitterly accepts the hard, cold waking and all its penalties. So Mole, after struggling with his memory for a brief space, shook his head sadly and followed the Rat. Portly woke up with a joyous squeak and wiggled with pleasure at the sight of his father's friends, who had played with him so often in past days. In a moment, however, his face grew blank, and he fell to hunting round in a circle with pleading whine. As a child that has fallen happily asleep in its nurse's arms, and wakes to find itself alone and laid in a strange place, and searches corners and cupboards and runs from room to room, despair growing silently in its heart, even so Portly searched the island and searched, dogged and unwearying, till at last the black moment came for giving it up and sitting down and crying bitterly. The mole ran quickly to comfort the little animal, but Rat, lingering, looked long and doubtfully at certain hoof marks deep in the sward. "Some great animal has been here," he murmured slowly and thoughtfully,
and stood musing, his mind strangely stirred. "Come along, Rat," called the mole. "Think of poor Otter waiting up there by the ford." Portly had soon been comforted by the promise of a treat, a jaunt on the river in Mr. Rat's real boat, and the two animals conducted him to the water's side, placed him securely between them in the bottom of the boat, and paddled off down the backwater. The sun was fully up by now and hot on them. Birds sang lustily and without restraint, and flowers smiled and nodded from either bank, but somehow, so thought the animals, with less of richness and blaze of color than they seemed to remember seeing quite recently somewhere. They wondered where. The main river reached again, they turned the boat's head upstream, towards the point where they knew their friend was keeping his lonely vigil. As they drew near the familiar ford, the mole took the boat in to the bank, and they lifted Portly out and set him on his legs on the towpath, gave him his marching orders and a friendly farewell pat on the back, and shoved out into midstream. They watched the little animal as he waddled along the path contentedly and with importance, watching him till they saw his muzzle suddenly lift and his waddle break into a clumsy amble as he quickened his pace with shrill whines and wiggles of recognition. Looking up the river, they could see Otter start up, tense and rigid, from out of the shallows where he crouched in dumb patience, and could hear his amazed and joyous bark as he bounded up through the osiers onto the path. Then the mole, with a strong pull on one oar, swung the boat round and let the full stream bear them down again whither it would, their quest now happily ended. "I feel strangely tired, Rat," said the mole, leaning wearily over his oars as the boat drifted. "It's being up all night, you'll say, perhaps, but that's nothing. We do as much half the nights of the week at this time of the year. No, I feel as if I had been through something very exciting and rather terrible, and it was just over, and yet nothing particular has happened.
Or something very surprising and splendid and beautiful, murmured the rat, leaning back and closing his eyes. Feel just as you do, Mole. Simply dead tired, though not body tired. It's lucky we've got the stream with us to take us home. Isn't it jolly to feel the sun again, soaking into one's bones? And hark to the wind playing in the reeds.
It's like music, faraway music, said the mole, nodding drowsily.
So I was thinking, murmured the rat, dreamful and languid. Dance music, the lilting sort that runs on without a stop. But with words in it, too. It passes its words and out of them again. I catch them at intervals. Then it is dance music once more, and then nothing but the reeds. Soft, thin whispering.
You hear better than I, said the mole sadly. I cannot catch the words.
Let me try and give you them, said the rat softly, his eyes still closed. Now it is turning into words again, faint but clear. Lest the awe should dwell and turn your frolic to fret, you shall look on my power at the helping hour, but then you shall forget. Now the reeds take it up. Forget, forget, they sigh, and it dies away in a rustle and a whisper. Then the voice returns. Lest limbs be reddened and rent, I spring the trap that is set. As I loose the snare, you may glimpse me there, for surely you shall forget. Row nearer, mole, nearer to the reeds. It is hard to catch, and grows each minute fainter. Helper and healer I cheer, small waifs in the woodland wet. Strays I find in it, wounds I bind in it, bidding them all forget. Nearer, mole, nearer. No, it is no good. The song has died away into reed talk.
But what do the words mean? Asked the wondering mole.
That I do not know, said the rat simply. I passed them on to you as they reached me. Ah, now they return again, and this time full and clear. This time at last it is the real, the unmistakable thing, simple, passionate, perfect.
Well, let's have it then, said the mole, after he had waited patiently for a few minutes, half dozing in the hot sun. But no answer came. He looked and understood the silence. With a smile of much happiness on his face and something of a listening look still lingering there, the weary rat was fast asleep. Thank you for listening. The end. That was a good one. At first I wasn't really understanding what was going on, but like a spirit helped them find the baby otter. That was nice. It only happened. Oh, thanks. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I don't know if you're still here, Bobby, but thank you so much. That's awesome. And thank you for listening. Someone said thanks for reading for us. Um, Thanks for listening. I love reading when I have someone to read to. So thanks. But yeah, that was adorable. So Otter lost his son. Recap. Sorry. I like to I'm a verbal processor. So Otter lost his son and they were just gonna go to bed and then they both agreed. I love that they're both so like in tune with each other. Like Rat and Mole are really best friends because like Rat was like, well, we can go to bed now. But Mole was like, he didn't actually go to bed. So Mole was like, I don't want to go to bed. You want to go out and like look for this baby lost otter? And Rat's like, yep, that's what I was thinking. Let's do it. And they stay out all night for their friend to find his son. That was so nice. If they hadn't done that, I don't know. It sounded like they went quite a while, like down the river, and Otter wasn't looking that far. So he was just like, this is his favorite place. So I'm just always going to be in his favorite place in case he comes back to it. So if they hadn't done that, I don't know how long it would have taken for them to find him. That was so nice. And then yeah, so then the spirit like made them forget that they saw it. It was so interesting. I was like, as I was reading like the beginning of that, I was like, what is happening right now? I was just waiting it out because I was like, so yeah, like all of a sudden they're looking and Rat starts hearing this beautiful music. And then it's like, oh, there's like someone holding the baby otter. Yeah, that was cool. I like that chapter. That was sweet. But Anyway, that was a really short chapter too, actually. Um, they're usually at least 30 minutes, 35 minutes, but anyway, I don't have much else to say about it. That was a really simple one. Not a lot happened, but it was really descriptive. So a lot of words, but it was really simple. They just went down the river and found the baby. But it was really cool. Um, yeah, so you said the character switching is seamless. I love switching between the character voices. Oh, excuse me. I love switching. I hate, no, not, why did I start with I hate? I'm so sorry. I'm telling you, I talk faster than my brain thinks. I don't know why I do that. I love switching between characters. I love it when a chapter has like three or more characters. Like the last chapter I read had four characters in it. And at the end, it had like three more. So I had like seven different voices that I was trying to keep track of and switch between. And it's so much fun. I love reading Peter Pan in that sense. Like, I love being hooked because he's like, what's this? Anyway. And I love being Hook and Smee and um, Wendy. Yeah. Anyway, it's fun. I love different characters. But yeah, that chapter, the last one we read was about Mr. Toad. Um, there were at the end of the chapter, like the last page and a half, it introduced like three random characters we hadn't heard of yet. And I don't think they're going to come back. It was very like general. We didn't even get their names characters. So like on the spot as I'm reading, I have to think of new voices to use. And it's really fun. I like doing that. But anyway, I'm gonna stop. I don't have really anything else to say on that. I'm just gonna keep rambling. So, but yes, huge, huge, huge thank you if you're listening or you listened to that while I was reading. I love having someone to read to. Um, reading out loud is so much better for me than reading in my head. So, thank you for watching, listening. Um, but I do love reading, so it's great to have people to listen. After this, no, honestly, I don't think I'm ever gonna stop my read aloud streams. Like we've already read The House at Pooh Corner, and we started Peter Pan. So after this one, I'm probably gonna actually. Oh, never mind. I totally have the energy. We should read a Peter Pan. We started it. Like I started it when I was reading House at Pooh Corner, and it was like after reading a chapter, if I had the energy, I would read a chapter of Peter Pan at the end. And I kind of stopped doing that. So I'm going to do that today. Let's do it. I'm going to go get my Peter Pan. Hold on. BRB. I need a BRB screen. I meant to make a BRB screen yesterday and I forgot. I'll do that today. That'll be my thing. Okay, cool. Cool. So we've only read 3 chapters from Peter Pan. This is chapter 4. If you're still watching, thank you for watching. But yeah. Okay. This is my favorite book in the world. Okay, here we go. I'm excited. I don't know why I didn't think to do this before. All right. Chapter 4, The Flight. Second to the right and straight on till morning. That, Peter had told Wendy, was the way to the Neverland, but even birds, carrying maps and consulting them at windy corners, could not have sighted it with these instructions. Peter, you see, just said anything that came into his head. At first, his companions trusted him implicitly, and so great were the delights of flying that they wasted time circling round church spires or any other tall objects on the way that took their fancy. John and Michael raced, Michael getting a start. They recalled with contempt that not so long ago they had thought themselves fine fellows for being able to fly round a room. Not so long ago, but how long ago? They were flying over the sea before this thought began to disturb Wendy seriously. John thought it was their second sea and their third night. Sometimes it was day, sometimes it was dark, and sometimes light. And now they were very cold and again too warm. We're reading Peter Pan now. This is chapter 4. Okay. Did they really feel hungry at times, or were they merely pretending because Peter had such a jolly new way of feeding them? His way was to pursue birds who had food in their mouths suitable for humans and snatch it from them. Then the birds would follow and snatch it back, and they would all go chasing each other gaily for miles, parting at last with mutual expressions of goodwill. But Wendy noticed with gentle concern that Peter did not seem to know that this was rather an odd way of getting your bread and butter, nor even that there are other ways. Certainly, they did not pretend to be sleepy. They were sleepy. And that was a danger, for the moment they popped off, down they fell. The awful thing was that Peter thought this funny. There he goes again, he would cry gleefully, as Michael suddenly dropped like a stone. Save him! Save him! Cried Wendy, looking with horror at the cruel sea far below. Eventually, Peter would dive through the air and catch Michael just before he could strike the sea, and it was lovely the way he did it, but he always waited till the last moment, and you felt it was his cleverness that interested him more, and not the saving of human life. Also, he was fond of variety, and the sport that engrossed him one moment would suddenly cease to engage him, so there was always the possibility that the next time you fell he would let you go. He could sleep in the air without falling by merely lying on his back and floating, but this was partly at least because he was so light that if you got behind him and blew, he went faster. Do be more polite to him, Wendy whispered to John when they were playing. Follow my leader. Oh, then tell him to stop showing off, said John. When playing Follow My Leader, Peter would fly close to the water and touch each shark's tail in passing, just as in the street you may run your finger along an iron railing. They could not follow him in this with much success, so perhaps it was rather like showing off, especially as he kept looking behind to see how many tails they missed. You must be nice to him, Wendy impressed on her brothers. What could we do if he were to leave us? We could go back, Michael said. How could we ever find our way back without him? Well, then, we could go on, said John. That is the awful thing, John. We should have to go on, for we don't know how to stop. This was true. Peter had forgotten to show them how to stop. John said that if the worst came to the worst, all they had to do was to go straight on, for the world was round, and so in time they must come back to their own window. And who is to get food for us, John? I nipped a bit out of that eagle's mouth pretty neatly, Wendy. After the 20th try, Wendy reminded him. And even though we became good at picking up food, see how we bump against clouds and things if he is not near to give us a hand. Indeed, they were constantly bumping. They could now fly strongly, though they still kicked far too much, but if they saw a cloud in front of them, the more they tried to avoid it, the more certainly did they bump into it. If Nana had been with them, she would have had a bandage round Michael's forehead by this time. Peter was not with them for the moment, and they felt rather lonely up there by themselves. He could see so much faster than they that he would suddenly shoot out of sight to have some adventure in which they had no share. He would come down laughing, or something fearfully funny he had been saying to a star, but he had already forgotten what it was, or he would come up with mermaid scales still sticking to him, and yet not be able to say for certain what had been happening. It was really rather irritating to children who had never seen a mermaid. And if he forgets them so quickly, Wendy argued, how can we expect that he would go on remembering us? Indeed, sometimes when he returned, he did not remember them, at least not well. Wendy was sure of it. She saw recognition come into his eyes as he was about to pass them the time of day and go on. Once even she had to call him by name. I'm Wendy, she said agitatedly. He was very sorry. I say, Wendy, he whispered to her. Always, if you see me forgetting you, just keep on saying I'm Wendy, and then I'll remember. Of course, this was rather unsatisfactory. However, to make amends, he showed them how to lie out flat on a strong wind that was going their way. And this was such a pleasant change that they tried it several times and found they could sleep thus with security. Indeed, they would have slept longer, but Peter tired quickly of sleeping, and soon he would cry in his captain voice, "We get off here!" So, with occasional tiffs, but on the whole rollicking, they drew near the Neverland. For after many moons they did reach it, and what is more, they had been going pretty straight all the time, not perhaps so much owing to the guidance of Peter or Tink as because the island was out looking for them. It is only thus that anyone may sight those magic shores. Hmm. There it is, Peter said calmly. Where? Where all the arrows are pointing. Indeed, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing it out to the children, all directed by their friend the sun, who wanted them to be sure of their way before leaving them for the night. Wendy and John and Michael stood on tiptoe in the air to get their first sight of the island. Strange to say, they all recognized it at once, and until fear fell upon them, they hailed it, not as something long dreamt of and seen at last, but as a familiar friend to whom they were returning home for the holidays. John, there's the lagoon. Wendy, look at the turtles burying their eggs in the sand. I say, John, I see your flamingo with the broken leg. Michael, there's your cave. John, what's that in the brushwood? It's a wolf with her whelps. Wendy, I do believe that's your little whelp. There's my boat, John, with her side stove in. No, it isn't. Why, we burnt your boat. That's her at any rate. Say, John, I see the smoke of the redskin camp. Where? Show me, and I'll tell you where the and I'll tell you by the way the smoke curls whether they are on the warpath. There, just across the mysterious river. I see now. Yes, they're on the warpath, right enough. Peter was a little annoyed with them for knowing so much, but if he wanted to lord it over them, his triumph was at hand, for have I not told you that Anne and fear fell upon them? It came as the arrows went, leaving the island in gloom. In the old days at home, the Neverland had always begun to look a little dark and threatening by bedtime. Then unexplored patches arose in it and spread. Black shadows moved about in them. The roar of the beasts of prey was quite different now, and above all, you lost the certainty that you would win. You were quite glad that the night lights were in. You even liked Nana to say that this was just the mantelpiece over here, and that the Neverland was all make-believe. Of course, the Neverland had been make-believe in those days, but it was real now, and there were no night lights, and it was getting darker every moment. And where was Nana? They had been flying apart, but they huddled close to Peter now. His careless manner had gone at last, his eyes were sparkling, and a tingle went through them every time they touched his body. They were now over the fearsome island, flying so low that sometimes a tree grazed their feet. Nothing horrid was visible in the air, yet their progress had become slow and labored, exactly as if they were pushing their way through hostile forces. Sometimes they hung in the air until Peter had beaten on it with his fists. They don't want us to land, he explained. Who are they? Wendy whispered, shuddering. But he could not or would not say. Tinker Bell had been asleep on his shoulder, but now he wakened her and sent her on in front. Sometimes he poised himself in the air, listening intently, with his hand to his ear, and again he would stare down with eyes so bright that they seemed to bore 2 holes to earth. Having done these things, he went on again. His courage was almost appalling. Would you like an adventure now? He said casually to John. Or would you like to have your tea first? Wendy said tea first, quickly, and Michael pressed her hand in gratitude, but the braver John hesitated. What kind of adventure? He asked cautiously. There's a pirate asleep in the pampas just beneath us, Peter told him. If you like, we'll go down and kill him. I don't see him, John said after a long pause. I do. Suppose, John said a little huskily, he were to wake up. Peter spoke indignantly. You don't think I would kill him while he was sleeping? I would wake him first, and then kill him. That's the way I always do. I say, do you kill many? Tons. John said, how ripping, but decided to have tea first. He asked if there were many pirates on the island just now, and Peter said he had never known so many. Who is captain now? Hook, answered Peter, and his face became very stern as he said that hated word. James Hook? Aye. Then indeed Michael began to cry, and even John could speak in gulps only, for they knew Hook's reputation.
He was Blackbeard's bosun, John whispered huskily. He is the worst of them all. He is the only man of whom Barbecue was afraid.
That's him, said Peter.
What is he like? Is he big?
He is not so big as he was.
How do you mean?
I cut off a bit of him.
You?
Yes, me, said Peter sharply.
I wasn't meaning to be disrespectful.
Oh, all right.
But I say, what bit?
His right hand.
Then he can't fight now?
Oh, can't he just?
Left-hander?
He has an iron hook instead of a right hand, and he claws with it.
Claws?
I say, John, said Peter.
Yes?
Say aye, sir.
Aye, sir.
There is one thing, Peter continued, that every boy who serves under me has to promise, and so must you. John paled. It is this. If we meet Hook in open fight, you must leave him to me.
I promise,
John said loyally, and for the moment they were feeling less eerie because Tink was flying with them in her light, and in her light they could distinguish each other. Unfortunately, she could not fly so slowly as they, and so she had to go round and round them in a circle, in which they moved as in a halo. Wendy quite liked it, until Peter pointed out the drawback. She tells me, he said, that the pirates sighted us before the darkness came and got Long Tom out.
The big gun?
Yes, and of course they must see her light, and if they guess we are near it, they are sure to let fly. Wendy, John, Michael. Tell her to go away at once, Peter, the three cried simultaneously, but he refused. She thinks we have lost the way, he replied stiffly, and she is rather frightened. You don't think I would send her away all by herself when she was frightened? For a moment the circle of light was broken, and something gave Peter a loving little pinch. Then tell her, Wendy begged, to put out her light. She can't put it out. That is about the only thing fairies can't do. It just goes out of itself when she falls asleep, same as the stars.
Then tell her to sleep at once,
John almost ordered. She can't sleep except when she's sleepy. It's the only other thing fairies can't do.
Seems to me, growled John, these are the only two things worth doing.
Here he got a pinch, but not a loving one. If only one of us had a pocket, Peter said, we could carry her in it. However, they had set off in such a hurry that there was not a pocket between the four of them. He had a happy idea. John's hat. Tink agreed to travel by hat if it was carried in the hand. John carried it, though she had hoped to be carried by Peter. Presently Wendy took the hat, because John said it struck against his knee as he flew, and this, as we shall see, led to mischief, for Tinker Bell hated to be under an obligation to Wendy. In the black topper, the light was completely hidden, and they flew on in silence. It was the stillest silence they had ever known, broken once by a distant lapping, which Peter explained was the wild beast drinking at the ford, and again by a rasping sound that might have been the branches of trees rubbing together, but he said it was the redskins sharpening their knives. Even those noises ceased. To Michael the loneliness was dreadful. "If only something would make a sound," he cried. As if in answer to his request, the air was rent by the most tremendous crash he had ever heard. The pirates had fired Long Tom at them. The roar of it echoed through the mountains, and the echoes seemed to cry savagely, "Where are they? Where are they? Where are they?" Thus sharply did the terrified three learn the difference between an island of make-believe and the same island come true. When at last the heavens were steady again, John and Michael found themselves alone in the darkness. John was treading the air mechanically, and Michael, without knowing how to float, was floating. "Are you shot?" John whispered tremulously. "I haven't tried yet," Michael whispered back. We know now that no one had been hit. Peter, however, had been carried by the wind of the shot far out to sea, while Wendy was blown upwards with no companion but Tinker Bell. It would have been well for Wendy if at that moment she had dropped the hat. I don't know whether the idea came suddenly to Tink, or whether she had planned it on the way, but she at once popped out of the hat and began to lure Wendy to her destruction. Tink was not all bad. Or rather, she was all bad just now, but on the other hand, sometimes she was all good. Fairies have to be one thing or the other because being so small, they unfortunately have room for one feeling only at a time. They are, however, allowed to change, only it must be a complete change. At present she was full of jealousy of Wendy. What she said in her lovely tinkle Wendy could not of course understand, and I believe some of it was bad words, but it sounded kind, and she flew back and forward, plainly meaning, "Follow me and all will be well." What else could poor Wendy do? She called to Peter and John and Michael, and got only mocking echoes in reply. She did not know yet that Tink hated her with the fierce hatred of a very woman. And so bewildered and now staggering in her flight, she followed Tink to her doom. The end. Thanks for listening if you stayed. I'm gonna keep doing that. I don't know why I stopped. Honestly, I have like episodes where I just don't have the energy to do even one whole chapter. So I push through a chapter and then I'm like, okay, it's time to get off. You liked it? Oh, I'm so glad. That's Peter Pan. Favorite book ever. But yeah, whenever I have the energy or we have like a shorter chapter like today from this, I'll read a chapter of Peter Pan at the end. But regardless, if we finish this book and we haven't finished Peter Pan yet, I'll just go ahead and finish Peter Pan before starting a new book. But yay! I'm so glad we got to read both. Okay, cool. Um, yeah. So if you came in the middle, at the beginning of that chapter, they were flying and Peter taught them how to fly, but he didn't really teach them how to stop flying. So they just had to keep flying and like try not to lose him or hope that when he flew away from them, he'd come back kind of thing. Because they're just like, what are we gonna do if he like forgets about us and leaves us? But anyway, because Peter has like the worst memory too. So he's basically like mentality of like a 7-year-old because he's all about pretending and he everything is very lighthearted for him. Like he doesn't really take much seriously, and he forgets things a lot. So he's great. No, he's not. He's terrible. But anyway, it's a lot to dissect. Like it's a love. I love Peter, and I also really don't like Peter at the same time. But anyway, you'll see more of why on that the more we read the book. But we've only had like 2 chapters with Peter in it so far. So, but anyway, cool. I'm glad I streamed today. Um, I don't think there's much else to say. Thanks for watching. If you did, or if you're coming in and watching now after the stream, thank you. I hope you enjoy. And yeah, stay safe. Have a good day. I love you guys. Bye.